Hi, I'm pro saxophonist Jamie Anderson. You're watching Get Your Sax Together, and on this week's lesson, I'm going to give you a roadmap which is going to show you how to play jazz on saxophone. This week's free online saxophone lesson is going to be a bit more informal than previous weeks. Not going to have any fancy graphics and all that stuff. And what I'm going to do is give you a very broad outline of the kind of things that you're going to need to get in place if you want to play jazz on saxophone. There's a free PDF for this lesson which you can get by going down into the description. And also, please go and check out my free 1 hour Saxophone Success Masterclass, which is my gift to you guys. It's as much as I could fit in 1 hour about everything that I know about playing saxophone. Just go down to the link in the description to pick that up, or you can go to www.getyoursaxtogether.com/masterclass. Learning jazz is, of course, a lifetime's work. So there's no way I can actually teach you how to play jazz in totality in one short video. However, I've broken the approaches down, or the steps, or the methods into 4 distinct different categories. The first one is learning how to play jazz from the theoretical, academic standpoint. The second approach is by learning from previous jazz masters, like the ones pictured behind me, and like the saxophonists featured in my Hall of Fame series. The third important milestone for learning jazz is you have to master your own instrument. You have to be technically proficient at playing this lump of tubing, a stick of wood and pads. So you've got to get your sax together. And finally, the fourth phase, or the fourth step, is synthesizing all those steps and then trying to forget about them to really express what you want to say from your heart. Before we kick off, let's talk about jazz itself. This is not a lesson on the history of jazz or what jazz is, but jazz means something different to absolutely everybody. For some people, jazz might be Louis Armstrong, St. James Infirmary. For somebody else, it might be bebop, Charlie Parker, or hard bop like Hank Mobley or John Coltrane in the 50s. For somebody else, it might be cool jazz like Dave Brubeck, Take 5. For somebody else, it might be bluesy. I did a video recently on the blues. You get blues jazz. Some people might think that's jazz. And then there's the sort of journeying epic jazz of the 60s, like later John Coltrane, and the free jazz movement. That might be jazz to some people. And then, of course, later on, jazz fused with lots of other kinds of music like jazz rock, jazz fusion, jazz funk, Grover Washington, Kool and the Gang. You might like smooth jazz. You might like modern jazz, whatever that is. Big band jazz. You might even like jazz fused with electronic music and DJ culture. For you, that might be what jazz is. So for everybody, we've all got a different concept of what jazz is. So it's very difficult to teach people what jazz is because you've got everything from Kool and the Gang to Louis Armstrong and everything in between. But whether it's straight ahead jazz, bossa nova, Afro-Cuban music, or even folky jazz like Jan Garbarek, for example, some of the key elements are going to remain the same in jazz. And that's what we really want to get to grips with if we want to learn how to play jazz. So the important thing is to get very clear in your head what jazz is for you and what you want to achieve with your jazz. Do you just want to play famous tunes like Summertime, Take 5? Or do you want to be able to improvise? Do you want to be able to improvise on a simple blues scale? Or do you want to be able to play over complicated changes or maybe modal music? So the first step is to really have a think what jazz is to you and what your goals are and what you want to achieve by playing jazz. So first of all, let's talk about the first approach, and that is learning the theory of jazz. I guess you'd say this was my early path. I went to the Fife Youth Jazz Orchestra and I went to various jazz summer schools, and I really went through the jazz education system, which of course is not traditionally how jazz was learned. In its infancy back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. But yep, I'm a total product of the jazz education system, which has got its pros and cons, which we'll talk about later. So how can you learn the theory, the cerebral part of jazz, the knowledge, the nuts and bolts? Well, you can obviously take private lessons. I know that many of you have got a teacher, and hopefully that teacher can teach you this kind of theory. You can also buy books. There's many books, great books on jazz. And now, of course, just like you're watching here, you can go to YouTube, which is increasingly becoming the most popular resource to find out about jazz. This is all quite sort of more bite-sized stuff compared to going to music college itself, which is a very detailed and intensive education into music. I went to university to do music, and then I went to the Guildhall School of Music to do a postgraduate degree in jazz and studio music, and I learned a hell of a lot there. In fact, let me just grab my notes. So here are just a few of my notes that I took at the Guildhall School of Music. It's all very detailed, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. So the kind of stuff that you can learn when you go to music college or from books or even from YouTube is chord types, the modes of the major and melodic minor scale, chord scale relationships, common chord sequences, what 2-5-1s are, how to use enclosures, how to use rhythmic devices, improvising techniques, best practices for playing jazz, group interplay. You can learn all these things at music college, which is exactly what I did. And if you study with me, I can teach you the theory of all these things as well. All this stuff is super important. However, it's not the be all and end all, as you'll see when we move on to approach 2. So approach 2 is learning from the masters. Behind me, you can see some classic albums, and you can see some of the most famous players of jazz saxophone in history. Now, for me, this is what I did after college. When I went to music college, I studied the very theoretical, cerebral parts of jazz, which I could then apply when I started studying the masters. And what I did was I transcribed as much as I could. Loads of different solos of classic players, classic recordings. So the main body of work you can do in learning from the masters is, of course, transcribing them. I always say it, but you can go to my video linked up there on transcribing to learn how to do it. What I did was, after I'd finished music school and I'd accumulated all that theoretical knowledge, I then started transcribing all the best players in jazz. And I don't know where the rest of them have gone. This is only a small percentage of what I did. I learnt the solos, I wrote them all out. I saw what these people were doing. Sonny Stitt, Solly Rollins, loads of John Coltrane, even modern players, you know, Branford and all the rest of it. And I studied those recordings until I learned how these people did it. So what do you get from studying the masters? Well, you learn phrasing, you learn articulation, how to sound really in the pocket and authentic. You learn that from transcribing solos. You learn rhythm and a great feel and a great time feel, because you have to exactly copy how they play it. You learn great licks. You learn the basis of jazz language. You learn the feel of how to play jazz. You learn to emulate the sound of your favorite players. And of course, you learn a load of different jazz tunes while you're doing all your transcribing. So for me, approach 2 has to be done in hand with step 1, which is learning the theory. Without the theory, you could just go straight to the masters and learn, which is probably better than just doing approach 1, to be honest. But then using the theory, you can put the two together, and then you can look at the masters knowing what the theory is as well. And that's the real golden ticket. So step 2, learn from the masters and transcribe your heart out. Now, step 3 is learning how to play your instrument. You can have all the theory in the world and you can transcribe as many solos as you want, but if you can't play saxophone, you're in big trouble. So for me, this has just been ongoing work throughout my whole life, working on technical exercises, studies with a tuner, improving my intonation, lots of tone stuff. So this is stuff that you must work on. Studying the great players in approach 2 will actually help your technique, because you need to get that technique to play a lot of the stuff that they play. So you can have a private teacher again, you can go to YouTube, you can get books, you can go to music college, all the same ways of learning how to really master your instrument. And of course, watching this channel. And you're going to learn how to get a fantastic tone. You're going to learn to master the technique of the saxophone, finger technique, body position, breathing, articulation, tonguing. You're going to learn how to use overtones. You're going to develop embouchure strength. You're going to improve your intonation, and you're going to extend the usable range of your horn, definitely to the bottom and hopefully into another octave above the normal saxophone range. So these are all the things that you're going to learn when you master your instrument. Now that is going to let you play the transcriptions that you've made, and it's also going to help you apply the theory that you've learned. The double whammy is using exercises which use the theory you've learned and developing your technical expertise. So for example, in my video linked up there now on the scales, how to practice scales part 2, you can practice your scales in thirds, but using your theoretical knowledge, you can also start memorizing what chords it is you're playing. So for example, if I'm in C major and I play 7th chords going up the C major scale, it sounds like this. Now, if you know your theory from step 1, you can start ingraining in your head that that's C major 7, D minor 7, E minor 7, F major 7, G 7, A minor 7, B minor 7 flat 5 as you're playing it. So you're getting your technique together and you're starting to learn about chords. The final step 4 is synthesizing. That's easy to say, isn't it? Synthesizing everything that you've learned from 1, 2, and 3. So you've learned the theory, and you have to mix that in with the transcriptions that you've learned from the masters and analyze what they're playing using the theory and then learn from it. And then using your technique, you can execute those ideas. But at the end of the day, you have to try and make as much of that automatic as you can. So really, you learn 1, 2, and 3, and then you do your very best to forget it all, because the most important thing about music is expressing yourself, your heart and soul. Everyone lives and breathes music. Imagine a world without music. It would be absolutely miserable. You know, I've made my whole life about saxophone and music, and I love it. I love it, love it, love it. And presumably you love it because you're watching this video. So when you play jazz, sometimes it can be too overwhelming dealing with everything, chords, oh, where am I, where's the chord sequence? But practicing enough will help you internalize enough of that so that you can really express the emotion of what you want to communicate through your sax. And of course, the greatest musicians have all done that. They go above and beyond technical considerations to be the masters that they are. That might be quite a lofty aspiration for most, but try at the end of the day, whenever you play, just to make music. Leave space, listen, try and communicate an idea, something meaningful. So that is the 4th step of putting it all together. So that's it for this week. Hopefully I've given you an overarching roadmap on the kind of things that you're going to need to get together if you want to play jazz. You need to learn some theory, some knowledge. You need to study the great players and see how they're doing to make it sound like jazz. You need to get your saxophone together. And finally, you need to synthesize it all into an expression that's meaningful musically and that can communicate some emotion to people. Thanks again for watching. I really appreciate you guys watching these videos and giving me all your support. Remember to go and have a look at the 1 hour Saxophone Success Masterclass at www.getyoursaxtogether.com/masterclass. I've put together a PDF for this lesson, which you can get from the link in the description, which is summarizing the main points of what I've been talking about and giving you some of the resources that you can go to from my previous videos to help you on your journey learning how to play jazz on saxophone. It's been a pleasure. I look forward to seeing you next week. Keep practicing smart, keep enjoying your instrument, and I'll see you later. Bye.